So when you ask the question, does HIV cause AIDS? The question is, does a virus cause a syndrome? How does a virus cause a syndrome? It can't. The acronym. The acronym is acquired immune deficiency syndrome. It's not a disease. It's not AIDD. A syndrome, in medical terms, is a group of diseases. It's a syndrome. This person who's wearing an ANC t-shirt, who's carrying a big ANC title, is not the ANC. There's a person who was infiltrated by the old order into the ANC, but now occupies a senior position in the ANC. And what's your task? The task is to repeat what their handler tells them to repeat. You know, from day one, from 1994, there are people from the old order who said, the ANC thinks it has won a war. It hasn't. In 1994, the ANC has won a battle, but we will win the war. And they intervened to make sure that they win the war. That's where we are today. The negatives that you see, as you say, that you have a certain period, first 15 years of our democracy, very positive. And the next 15 years, the opposite direction. Why?
Honestly, things were good since 1994 towards 2007, something like that. But why? Here's a good reason. Stick around. I have an answer. And Thabo Mbeki might be an answer to that question. Let us follow Thabo Mbeki's lineage. Stay around. I'll break it down from you, from his great-great-grandfather. During the 6th Frontier War, or Cape Frontier War, British against King Yinza, and even before that time, into the time whereby the grandfather of Thabo Mbeki was a chief made by the British government. Stick around.
After I liberate the Jewish people, I will go to Africa to help liberate the black people. We have our African brethren, the Ethiopian Jews, who are in our society, and I personally work every few weeks to help integrate more and more and incorporate them in our society. I believe this. I believe in Africa. I believe in your future.
Hayi ukuthi amazwe asentshonalanga agcina ngokuthi nje ngeke asinike usizo, asizonda, azonda iANC ngoba ethi isebenza namakomanisi. Uma sesibuya sesiqala ukunegotiate, bathi lamazwe asentshonalanga, hey nine nuclear nina nezikhali ezenungu, zibulaleni ngoba akufanele ukuthi lamakomanisi uma sephethizwe abe nalamandla ukuze bangalithola ulwazi lokusebenza inuclear. Ngiyengibezwe nje abantu bekhuluma la nabanye sebesupporta bengazi ukuthi isho ukuthini lento. Asifuni nuclear. We babo. Ngamanye amazwi, in the balance of forces, usupporta the wrong force.
Now you can hear what Zuma is saying. That's how Netanyahu is part of this video. And what Netanyahu is saying, that he is going to come and assist in Africa. Are we failing as Africans or African governments? Why does he want to come here? And you can see all the pictures, the explosions, how Israel is. After he said he was saving Israel or liberating it, he left it in shambles. There's debris everywhere. There's no place. People are displaced. Is that what he is going to do in Africa? Yes, he can, because what Zuma is saying, getting rid of the nuclear power, has put us in a state of vulnerability, because any country now that wants to attack us can, because we cannot fight back and we do not have that ultimate power, the nuclear power. Why is this important? It's because how this country is governed and the direction that this country is going, because of what I am about to reveal right now. We need paradigm change. Please share, like, or subscribe.
Let's talk Mbeki. Let's talk about Thabo Mbeki. So, let us talk about the weight of the coat. If oke wava xa kuthiwa uDlamini, apha ebusika ke abantu abaninzi bazobe bembathe uDlamini okanye benxibe uDlamini. Have you ever wondered why the coat is called uDlamini? History is not a straight line. It is indeed a tapestry woven from blood, betrayal, survival, and adaptation. To understand the mind of our former president, Thabo Mbeki, one cannot merely look at the 1990s or the halls of the modern power. You must look at back, way back, centuries. You must travel to the misty peaks of the Drunken Speck, where an ancient empire fractured, forcing a proud people to choose between remaining and fighting and getting crushed. Now, in the beginning, there was the Great Abambo migration, a massive wave of Nguni, people who planted crops, moving southward through Africa. Their wealth measured in deep lowing of cattle and vastness of land they claimed. The house of Dlamini, we're going to look into that house. They were kings of the valleys, custodians of the soil. But royalty is a volatile thing. It depends on a lot of things. The wars, the time, the ruler. It depends on a lot. So deep within the Drunken Speck Mountains, Ukahlanga, near the modern day Bergville, in what is called KwaZulu-Natal today. That lineage from Dlamini split. But before the well-known Infekane, whatever, there's something happened. According to the ancient fireside historians, Okanye histories, the lineage traces back to a pivotal generational rift, whereby there was Umzizana and Tolwana. From the ancestral line came Umzizana. Umzizana was a man of peace and a keeper of the old ways. And on the other side, it was Tolwana. They were twins. Because of succession business, which is a very bloody business, a bitter betrayal dispute then erupted between the two factions, or the two brothers, creating factions, and then people had to choose between the two. Those who broke away sought new paths, and then those who remained, they were fiercely loyal to Umzizana. Then all of those took his name, and then they crystallized it into a proud independent nation that is today known as amaZizi. For generations, amaZizi flourished under the shadow of the peaks of the great mountain, the Drunken Speck Mountain. They were, of course, a branch of the Dlamini tree, carrying the Izithakazelo, the praises names of Jadu, of Fagade. They built massive stone kraals. They watched the stars. They also believed that the mountains would protect them forever. But they were wrong. They were certainly wrong. Now let us get to the famously known history or disruption that caused this second migration from the Drunken Speck Mountains. The ashes of the Mfutane, 1820s. So We all know that the 1820s brought the Mfecane, the crushing, the scattering, and the rise of the king of Zulus, Shaka Zulu. With his war machine, he disrupted the delicate balance of the southern Africa. He had his own intentions when doing so. So smaller kingdoms were ground to dust like nothing at all. Now, let us draw our attention very close to the Mbeki family, the origins of Mbeki family itself. This is the ancestor of the Mbekis. Nonkasa, Thabo Mbeki's great-great-grandfather. He was a amaZizi patriarch who watched his ancestral lands turn into a graveyard during the time. The choices were brutal. It's either you submit or be absorbed into the Zulu state. It's either you stay or you die. But there was also another option, to run into the terrifying unknown. What did Nonkasa do in this case? He had his family to look after. He then chose survival. He gathered his family, including his young son, Mbeki, Nonkasa. Now, this is the person who's carrying the name of Mbeki, who was named Mbeki. His first name was Mbeki. This is Mbeki Nonkasa, the son of Nonkasa. He joined a massive, desperate exodus of thousands of refugees, amaZizi, amaHlobi, amaBhele. These tribes fled south, scaling the treacherous mountain passes of Lesotho, walking barefoot through snow and jagged rock. They were also hunted by starvation. Some died. Cannibal bands, of course, and rival raiders. It was not easy. It was very tough for this group of people. They were running away from home and looking for asylum somewhere else. They left behind the graves of their ancestors and the comfort of the Dlamini name, moving toward the unknown, where they were accepted or welcomed by a kingdom that then made them people once more, gave them bread, and gave them a name. Death of amaVengu. By the early 1830s, the exhausted skeletal remnants of the amaZizi reached the borders of Xhosa. In fact, the great Xhosa kingdom, which was then ruled by the towering figure of King Hintsa Kakauta. To imagine the scene, Nonkasa and his son, Mbeki Nonkasa, standing before the Xhosa court. They had no cattle. It was not really funny. Their clothes were rags. They then fall on their knees when they were asked who they are and then what do they seek. They offer a word that would then redefine South African history, and the name was Siyamfenguza, which means we are wanderers, we are beggars looking for work, for shelter, for a place to rest our heads. Because King Hintsa was of Xhosa nation, and then Xhosa nation is of African nation. He then practiced the great African philosophy of Ubuntu. He took pity on them. He declared them that they are wanderers, but they shouldn't be harmed. And then he distributed them among the Xhosa nation, the Xhosa households. He then granted them land, give them dignity, because everyone has a right to dignity. But they were not of the Xhosa nation. Therefore, they were what? They had to be given this identity so that they don't lose who they are themselves. They don't forget who they are. They were second-class citizens because the land is not theirs. But for the young Mbeki growing up in this environment, he had a burning desire of independence because we deserve to be independent. He needed security. This was branded in his soul. And a perfect time met his preparation when in 1834 he got a chance to cross and become a British alliance. 1834 was the 6th Cape Frontier War. The British Empire was clashing violently with King Yinsa's Xhosa forces non-stop. Then, for amaMfengu, they found themselves for some odd reasons trapped in the middle. I don't know why, because we all know who were they supposed to be siding with in this moment. But for them, this moment was terrifying. But they had to calculate. So the moment of terrifying calculation came onto their doorstep. They had to think, what is it that we do now, being faced with this situation? Remember, this is the land of Yinsa. People are coming to attack Yinsa, the Xhosa nation. And they're amongst the Xhosa nation they've been eating with them. Instead of teaming up with them and fighting against this new enemy, what did they do? They asked themselves, do they fight for the Xhosa king who gave them shelter and food? Or do they now align with the white men from the sea who promised them total liberation? Because the British colonial authorities led by Benjamin Durban, who was then honored by naming that place Durban, saw amaMfengu as a perfect weapon that he could use. And then he then offered them a deal. He asked them to turn their backs on the Xhosa and assist the British military. What are they going to get in return? You may be asking yourself. They promised that the British Empire will give them their own independence, their own independent land. But where? So amaMfengu actually knew that amaXhosa will not win this war this time around, because probably they heard about the history of the other wars, because this one is the 6th one. And they decided, they were like, okay, British, we are listening. You are going to be free from the Xhosa rule. Then amaMfengu made their choice in 1835 to be precise, under the leader of colonial missionaries. Over 16,000. 16,000 amaMfengu included the family of Mbeki, the Mbeki's family, Nonkasa, the one who had a dream of independence. Now the British people are promising him that. What does he do? Nonkasa gathered their meager belongings and marched out of Yinsa's territory under the British military escort. Now, this is total betrayal. Of course, to the Xhosa, this was ultimate betrayal. If you have ever heard of what is called the Jews of the Covered Land, that term refers to the Vengus. You know, some people went to the Middle East in the 1940s seeking asylum. Pity. Out of nowhere, out of the blue, now they wanted to rule over the Middle East. They want to rule the whole of the Middle East. That's what we're talking about here today. So let's go back to the Mbeki family. Alright, so this is what they did. They decided to assist the British. Now, the people who were fed by amaXhosa now had turned to be British spies. Can you imagine? They are British spies and scouts. Now amaMfengus were resettled in what is called Pedi and a colonial frontier outpost, because this is where they saw a sacred oath to the British crown, saying they will obey the crown of England or the King of England, and they will educate their children, and they accept that the Christian God is their God and Savior. This happened under that Milk Tree, Pedi. It was into this newly transformed, highly driven world that Thabo Mbeki, son of Mbeki, Nonkasa, was raised. Now we are going to be talking about the Black Englishman and the compromise of the power, or compromise of power. In the 1860s to 1890s, Thabo Mbeki did not grow up in a traditional African homestead. He grew up in the Hilton town, or Hilton Methodist Mission Station. That's what Thabo Mbeki was back in the day. What is called Ikobok. He wore European trousers. He grew up in a Methodist Mission Station. He polished his shoes. He mastered the English language. He spoke with the cadence of a London clerk. That's how he spoke his English, while retaining his flawless, adapted isiXhosa. Because remember, he is not the original Xhosa. He called him Odlamini. We all know now Odlamini today, they have their own territory where it is called Swatini. He became the ultimate Ikobok, the Christian convert. The Xhosa traditionalists, amaXaba, who still smeared their bodies with the red ochre and rejected the white man's ways, they looked at men like Thabo with a mixture of awe and disgust. That's how they looked at him. They called him the Black Englishman. So he was. Polished his shoes. He wore a tie. He wore like an Englishman. He went to a Methodist mission. He stayed there. He grew up there. He wore European trousers. So they called him Black Englishman. Umlungu Omnyama. So now let's get to the late 1860s. The British engineered another massive population shift. They then decided to move thousands of these loyal, westernized Mfengu into Transkei reserved region, whereby they created what is called today Mfengu land in the district of Namago. Now around 1904, he then built a legendary, prosperous homestead at Nyili. Right? Mfengu had been shattered during the Mfetane. They had no traditional royal bloodline, chiefs, nothing in the Eastern Cape. The British administration then had to manufacture some type of authority there. Guess what they did? Obviously, they had their own project. Then they formally gazetted uSikeleu, the highly educated, fiercely loyal, deeply compliant man, Sikeleu. They gazetted him as a government headman and a chief of Mbokani. You may be wondering today why we're having so many chiefs that are not traditionally orientated. Because of this era. There was this time whereby people were made chiefs by British people without even consulting the then king of the region. Sikeleu was made a chief of Mbokani. He was handed a colonial uniform, a government salary, and a staff of office. His chieftainship was not derived from the ancestors, it was derived from the British pen. His job was to collect taxes from his own people, enforce British livestock dipping laws, and maintain the imperial order. He was a buffer. But the person I'm talking about is the grandfather of Thabo Mbeki, the father of Thabo Mbeki. He took an oath under the milk tree, is it milkwood tree? Listening to all of the stories that he's making in front of us on TV here, telling us that in the ANC there are spies. People who are against the agenda. I wonder which agenda is this? His grandfather was made to collect taxes forcefully and enforce British livestock dipping laws, and then in maintaining the imperial order. As we all know that British has no permanent friend. Now I want us to look into that. There's something that happened after the fall of this chief. By 1910, the Union of South Africa was formed. As we know that the British Empire has no permanent friends, it only has what? Permanent interests. When the Union of South Africa in 1910 was formed, guess what? The white state no longer needed buffers. They no longer needed this independent black peasant buffer class. They wanted cheap, desperate labor for the gold mines of Johannesburg, the newly found trade industry. Now they're no longer needing to manipulate people mentally. but economically. So they had to make a way to do away with these buffers. They came up with a way. In 1911, the resident magistrate of Namatu turned on Skeleu. They then decided to remove him as a chief. They accused him of illegally selling oxen, a desperate attempt to maintain his financial autonomy in a crashing economy. Because they were crushing the economy at that time. They wanted all men to go to Johannesburg to give what? Labor, so that they can mine the gold. And now this Skeleu now, he can feel the pressure. Chief Skeleu now was stripped of his uniform. He was denied his salary and he was dismissed from his headmanship. The state that made him broke him. That's what always happens. The state that made him broken, in the midst of his humiliation, an extraordinary biological event occurred. Then in 1910, when Skeleu was an astonishing 81-year-old man, his youngest son was born, Calvin Archibald Vieira Mbeki. Archibald Vieira Mbeki was born that time. See, now you know about this person, Calvin Mbeki. History has a lot of historians have written books on it. Thabo Mbeki grew up watching the tragic decay of his father's colonial tree. What he did after seeing it. He saw that being a black Englishman offered no real protection because his father's been stripped of all of those privileges. Systemically crushed by the 1912 Native Land Act. Then in 1934, not mistaken, the colonial government, realizing they needed the Mbeki name to keep order in Namatu, they then approached the son. And then they offered to reinstate the family legacy. They offered him his father's old chief tension or adaptation. Thabo Mbeki, a different type of person, and looked at the government uniform. He looked at the staff office that had got his father's compliance and ultimate outbreak, and then left. Now, this is the part that confuses a lot of South Africans. This change of action, how things are to be done now. And really, before we could have a refusal, but it was an oath, so which then put all of them, even though he is refusing this, denying all of this, it's more like saying, as a wild person today, owning land, staying, living, all comfortable, being the preference at work, at earning better than others. All of these privileges today that these whitey ethnicities, like people who are living in South Africa, all the privileges that they are getting or in a position of enjoying just because of the past. Someone like this would say, nah, my father denied this reinstatement of being a chief. Therefore, we are no longer privileged or favored by the government. The history doesn't have it like that. As much as the father then became this person who was fighting against the system, let us not be confused. There's an oath that was taken under the tree.